My name is Morgan Kelly, and I was 52 when my mother used my name to bury a court notice, then stood in public and told my family I had ruined everything. She said it at the property appraisal review desk, in a room with gray carpet, plastic chairs, and a clerk who kept her eyes on her keyboard because even she knew this was not just paperwork anymore. My older brother, Daniel, stood beside her with his arms folded, wearing the careful, disappointed face he always used when he wanted strangers to think he was the reasonable one. My Aunt Ruth stood behind them with a purse hooked over her wrist and a tissue already in her hand, as if she had arrived prepared to comfort my mother for whatever pain I caused by existing. My mother looked at me in front of all of them and said, "Apparently one awkward dinner turned you into a professional victim." The room did not explode, nobody gasped, nobody told her she had gone too far. That was the worst part. Everyone just waited for me to apologize. They expected me to do what I had done my whole life: lower my voice, smooth the room, explain away the insult, protect my mother's dignity from the consequences of my mother's choices. But that morning, I had one folder under my arm. Inside it was my bank transfer history, hotel invoices, email timestamps, and a timeline so clean that even a stranger could follow the lie from the first missing envelope to the last fabricated claim. My mother thought she had brought me there to take blame. She did not know the insurance investigator had already asked the one question that would pull the whole story apart. The paper trail was not dramatic at first. It was worse than dramatic. It was organized, and it was already moving toward the people who thought I would keep quiet. For most of my adult life, my family called me dependable like it was praise. It was not praise. It was a job title. I was an operations manager for a regional medical supply company outside Cleveland. My work trained me to catch the small break in a chain, before the whole system failed. A late order was never just late. Someone touched it. Someone delayed it. Someone else pretended nobody had. I learned to follow the handoff. My family hated handoffs because handoffs reveal who touched what. When my mother, Evelyn Kelly, could not understand an insurance form, she called me. When Daniel forgot a contractor payment, he called me. When Aunt Ruth needed 3 confusing bills sorted, she called me. When a cousin needed a hotel, because her apartment flooded, they called me too. Not Daniel. Me. Daniel was my mother's golden child, because he could walk into a room late, smile, and still be treated like the responsible one. I was the son who stayed, after the smile wore off. My mother knew how to turn need into debt. "Family helps family," she would say. Daniel would add, "Don't make mom chase you." Ruth would soften it with, "Your father would want peace." 3 voices. 1 message: pay, fix, and be quiet. After my father died, the old family house became the center of every emergency. A broken gutter became abandonment. A tax letter became betrayal. A missed form became proof that someone did not love my mother enough. I lived across town and kept fixing things because fixing things was easier than being accused of cruelty. The property had repairs, appraisal disputes, insurance questions, and a local court notice tied to a response deadline. Boring words. Dangerous consequences. My mother wanted the house valued her way. Daniel wanted authority without paperwork. I wanted the forms handled correctly because a missed deadline can take away options you cannot get back. That was all. At least that was what I thought. The first warning came in late March, when my mother called me on a Tuesday night and asked if I could send a little money for a temporary hotel situation involving my cousin Leah. Leah was not a child, but she was vulnerable in the way people become vulnerable when too many problems stack up at once. She had been staying in a basement apartment that flooded after a pipe burst. She had nowhere clean to sleep for a few nights, and she was embarrassed enough that my mother kept saying, "Don't make her feel like a charity case." I asked how much. My mother said she did not know yet. That was the first thing that bothered me. My mother always knew amounts when she wanted reimbursement. But I was tired, and Leah needed a safe place, so I told my mother to send me the invoice when she had it. 2 hours later, Daniel texted me a hotel confirmation with no greeting. It was for 5 nights, not 2. The rate was higher than necessary. The name on the booking was not Leah's. It was my mother's. I asked why. Daniel replied, "Mom handled it. Just help if you're helping." That was Daniel's specialty. He could make a question sound like selfishness. I paid it anyway. The memo line on the transfer read, "Temporary emergency lodging." I remember typing those words because I had learned, in my job and in my family, that future confusion always begins with sloppy labels. I did not know that memo line would become the sentence that saved me. Over the next 2 weeks, there were more requests. A second hotel charge. A deposit. A rideshare reimbursement because Leah needed to get to work. A small grocery delivery. Each time, my mother framed it as urgent, private, and temporary. Each time, Daniel sent partial details and acted annoyed when I asked for receipts. Each time, Aunt Ruth floated in afterward with a soft little message about how proud my father would be that I was stepping up. Nobody said anything about a court notice. Nobody said anything about an insurance packet. Nobody said anything about using my name. Then, one Sunday dinner, the mood changed. It happened at my mother's house, at the same dining table where I had spent decades learning which subjects made her sigh. Daniel was there with his wife, Marcy. Aunt Ruth brought lemon bars. 2 cousins stopped by after church. My mother served roast chicken and barely looked at me. Halfway through dinner, Daniel made a joke about me needing a control tower for family life. I looked up from my plate. He smiled as if it was harmless. Marcy laughed too quickly. Aunt Ruth said, "Well, Morgan does like to manage things." My mother set down her fork and said, "Sometimes managing becomes meddling." That was the first public pebble thrown at me. It was small enough that I would have looked petty if I reacted. So I did not react. I asked if something was wrong. My mother dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, "Nothing, honey. I just think some people confuse help with ownership." Daniel leaned back and said, "Exactly." The table went quiet. Leah was not there. That mattered to me later. The person they claimed this was all for was not present when they began rewriting the meaning of the help. I should have pressed harder. Instead, I did what I always did. I swallowed the insult because making a scene in my mother's house felt like losing. The next morning, Aunt Ruth called me. She said my mother had been hurt by my tone at dinner. I said I barely spoke. Ruth sighed and said, "Sometimes silence has a tone too." That line stayed with me because my family had spent years teaching me that my silence meant guilt, my questions meant control, and my help meant obligation. There was no acceptable version of me except the version that paid, apologized, and stayed quiet. By Thursday, my mother asked me for another transfer. This one was not for Leah. She said there were property papers that needed a small handling fee. I asked which property papers. She said, "Don't start, Morgan." I said I was not starting. I was asking. She said Daniel already knew about it and there was no need for me to turn every family matter into a workplace investigation. That was the second warning. Daniel already knew. I asked Daniel directly. He replied, "It's nothing. Mom's stressed. Just don't make her chase you." I did not send the money that time. That was when the temperature shifted. My mother stopped calling me honey. Daniel stopped joking. Aunt Ruth started sending Bible verses about humility with no context. A week later, I received a notice to attend a property appraisal review follow-up because my name had been listed in connection with prior family communications. I read the notice twice. My name had been listed. Not copied. Not mentioned. Listed. I called my mother. She did not answer. I called Daniel. He let it ring once and sent me to voicemail. I texted both of them. "What communications?" My mother replied 20 minutes later. "We will discuss it as a family." That was never a good sentence. In my family, as a family meant everyone had already discussed it without me and I was being invited to accept the verdict. I requested the documents from the appraisal office, but because the matter involved an insurance review attachment and family property paperwork, they told me some records would need to be provided through the claim contact. I asked my mother for the full file. She sent me 2 blurry photos of pages that did not explain anything. One had a date at the top. One had my name near the bottom. Neither showed the original notice. When I asked for the missing pages, she wrote, "You always make things about yourself." That was the third warning. People who have nothing to hide usually send the page. The appraisal review meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I arrived early because that is what I do when paperwork matters. My mother was already there. So were Daniel, Aunt Ruth, Marcy, and my cousin Paul, who had no reason to be there except that my mother liked an audience when she felt wronged. They had arranged themselves like a jury. My mother wore her navy church blazer. Daniel held a folder he did not open. Aunt Ruth held tissues. I remember noticing the clerk behind the counter looking from them to me with the tired expression of someone who had seen families turn paperwork into theater before. My mother did not greet me. Daniel nodded like a manager about to discipline an employee. I asked what was going on. My mother said, loudly enough for the staff to hear, "We are here because you ignored the response notice, and now everyone has to deal with the consequences." It was so cleanly delivered that for 1 second I wondered if I had missed something real. The accusation was polished enough to make a stranger wonder if there had to be some truth under it. I said, "What response notice?" Daniel laughed once, not because it was funny, but because he wanted the room to hear disbelief. He said, "Come on, Morgan." My mother looked at the clerk, and then back at me. She said, "This is what he does. He asks for every tiny detail until everyone is exhausted, then acts like nobody told him anything." Aunt Ruth whispered, "Just apologize." I looked at her. She would not meet my eyes. My mother stepped closer. Then came the sentence. "Apparently one awkward dinner turned you into a professional victim." I felt something in me go cold. Not hot, not explosive, cold. The old Morgan would have defended himself right there. He would have listed dates from memory, asked for documents, argued that he had not received a notice, begged someone to admit the truth. But the old Morgan had never been publicly framed while an emergency hotel fund for a vulnerable relative sat underneath the lie like a rug they hoped nobody lifted. This was different. They were not just blaming me. They were attaching my name to a sequence of paperwork that could make it look like I had mishandled or misrepresented money. They had taken the one thing I had done quietly to protect someone else, and turned it into a weapon. So I did not raise my voice. I did not call my mother a liar. I did not ask Daniel how long he had known. I looked at the clerk and asked for the claim contact connected to the file. My mother blinked. Daniel's smile faded. The clerk gave me a number, and a packet reference. My mother said, "Morgan, this is not necessary." I said, "If my name is in the file, it is necessary." Daniel stepped in with his reasonable man voice. "Let's not make this bigger than it is." That was the first time I saw fear behind his calm. They did not want the truth. They wanted my signature under their lie. I left that office with no apology, no raised voice, and one reference number written on the back of a parking receipt. When I got home, my phone had 9 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 2 from Daniel, 4 from Aunt Ruth. The texts came in a pattern I knew too well. My mother, "I cannot believe you embarrassed me like that." Daniel, "You need to calm down." Aunt Ruth, "Your mother is shaking." My mother again, "This is exactly what I meant at dinner." Nobody sent the notice. Nobody sent the full packet. Nobody asked what the records showed. They only asked me to repair the room. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and a cup of coffee I forgot to drink. I had spent years using my skills to make other people's emergencies less damaging. This was the first time I used them for myself. I started with the bank. I exported every transfer connected to my mother, Daniel, Leah's hotel, and the property account for the last 6 months. Then I downloaded the confirmations. Then I copied the memo lines into a spreadsheet. Temporary emergency lodging. Hotel deposit for Leah. Rideshare reimbursement. Grocery delivery. No property response fee. No court filing. No insurance submission support. Nothing that matched what my mother had implied at the review desk. Next, I went through emails. My mother rarely emailed because texts gave her more room to deny context, but hotels and payment processors did not care about family dynamics. They sent receipts. Receipts are beautiful because they do not sigh, guilt trip, or cry on command. The hotel invoice dates told the first part of the truth. The first booking had been created before my mother told me Leah needed help. The second invoice had been sent to Daniel before he forwarded it to me. The grocery delivery had my mother's phone number attached. The rideshare receipt had a pickup location nowhere near Leah's workplace. That did not mean fraud by itself, but it meant the story was not clean. Then I pulled my text history. I searched for notice. Nothing from my mother before the meeting. I searched for deadline. Nothing. I searched for court. One message from Daniel after I refused the last transfer. Mom is stressed about court stuff. Don't add to it. Court stuff. That was all. Then I searched for insurance. That word appeared once, in a voice-to-text message my mother had sent by mistake, and then tried to delete. The text read, "The insurance packet has to look like he knew because otherwise they will ask why we waited." I read that line 3 times. Then I closed the laptop halfway. I did not answer anyone. I did not call my mother. I just sat there for a long time with that sentence glowing in the dark like a receipt she had signed by accident. Then I took a screenshot. That was the first moment I understood the shape of it. They had received a notice. They had waited or mishandled it. They had tried to build a claim narrative that pushed responsibility toward me. They had attached my name because I had been paying things, organizing things, and asking questions. And when I stopped sending money without documentation, they decided my questions were the perfect motive. I requested the complete insurance file that night. I sent a short email to the claim contact connected to the packet reference. I wrote, "My name is Morgan Kelly. I understand my name appears in connection with this family property file. Please provide any claim narrative, supporting attachments, correspondence, and submitted documents that reference me, my payments, or my alleged role in the response timeline. No emotion. No accusation. No family history. Just the file." The next morning, my mother called at 6:43. I let it ring. Daniel called at 6:52. I let it ring. Aunt Ruth texted at 7:15. "Morgan, your mother did not sleep. Please do not punish everyone over pride." Pride. That word almost made me answer. Instead, I opened a second spreadsheet tab and titled it Timeline. I began with the dates, but I did not write them like a report. I wrote them like a story anyone could hear. March 21st, the first hotel booking appeared under Evelyn Kelly's name, before my mother ever asked me for money. That same night, Daniel forwarded it to me like the problem had already been assigned. March 22nd, I sent the first transfer. The memo line said temporary emergency lodging. March 24th, a second invoice went to Daniel first. That mattered. He was already inside the paper trail before I was. That same day, I sent another transfer, labeled hotel deposit for Leah. March 26th, groceries. March 27th, another payment, because Leah still needed help. March 29th, Sunday dinner, where my questions became meddling. April 3rd, Daniel texted, "Mom is stressed about court stuff. Don't add to it. Court stuff. No notice." April 4th. My mother asked for a vague handling fee. April 5th. Everything changed because I said no without documentation. April 9th. The appraisal follow-up notice appeared with my name attached. April 11th. My mother stood at the review desk and blamed me in public. I left blanks where the original court notice should have been. Those blanks were not empty. They were the sound of someone hiding the first domino. By noon, the insurance office sent a partial file. It was not everything, but it was enough. The first page had one phrase near the footer that made me stop. Revised narrative. Revised from what? Who had seen version 1? If this was innocent, why did the story need drafts? I wrote those questions at the top of the timeline, before I read another word. Then my phone buzzed. "Danielle, do not overthink the file," he wrote. I stared at the message. I had not told him the file had arrived. There are moments when a lie makes one noise too many, and you finally hear the machine behind the wall. I wrote another line under my questions. "Daniel knows I have the packet." 30 seconds later, my mother called. I let it ring. Then a text came through from her. Please remember that your father would not want this picked apart by strangers. There it was again. Not, what did you find? Not, let me explain the missing notice. Just my father's memory laid across the doorway like a sandbag. I did not move the sandbag. I stepped over it. The next attachment opened slowly, and while the loading wheel turned, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear of them, from the possibility that, for once, I was not imagining the pattern. Then the page loaded. Daniel's statement sat right behind the invoice section. Not near the end. Not as an afterthought. Right behind the money. That order told me the packet was using him as a bridge between the payments and the blame. It was the first clean answer I had seen, and it was not comforting. It meant this was not one bad sentence. It was architecture. The claim narrative described a family property response delay, and implied that I had been involved in gathering, reviewing, and failing to respond to required notice materials. It attached hotel invoices as evidence of family emergency expenses and related response disruption. It did not say Leah's name clearly. It did not explain why emergency lodging was connected to a property response deadline. It used the phrase Morgan was aware of the situation. Aware. That word did a lot of dishonest work. Aware of Leah needing a safe place to sleep, yes. Aware of a court notice, no. Aware that my mother and brother were building a packet around my name, absolutely not. The packet also included a short statement from Daniel. It said, Morgan had been coordinating payments and documents for Mom, so we believed he was handling the paperwork side. Believed. Another useful word for people who want blame without proof. I read that sentence 3 times. Daniel had not just stood beside my mother while she accused me. He had put his version in writing. That changed something in me. Until then, part of me still wanted to believe Daniel had been passive. Cowardly, yes, but not active. The file corrected me. I printed his statement and placed it in the folder behind the bank transfer history. For the first time in my life, I did not explain myself to my mother. I explained the timeline to the documents. Over the next 3 days, my family stopped treating it like confusion and started treating it like a leak. My mother left a voicemail saying I had gone behind her back to strangers. Daniel sent one text, whatever you think you found, stop. Aunt Ruth wrote, your mother is not strong enough for public shame. None of them asked what the file showed. They only wanted to know who had seen it. Daniel called me during lunch on Thursday. I answered because his written statement was sitting on my desk. You know how these offices are, he said. They twist things. I said, your statement says you believed I was handling the paperwork side. He went quiet for 1 beat too long. Then he said, because you always do. That was the hinge. Not a denial. Abbott. They had turned my usefulness into assumed consent. I asked, where is the original notice? Mom had a lot going on. Where is it? Why are you being like this? Because the timeline does not work. His voice dropped. If you push this, it affects everyone. No. What affects everyone is a false packet. He snapped then. Don't talk like you're better than us, because you know how to make a spreadsheet. I looked at the spreadsheet open on my screen. For the first time, the thing they mocked was the thing they should have feared. Aunt Ruth came by my house that evening without asking. I saw her through the peephole holding a casserole dish like a peace offering from a church basement. I opened the door, but did not invite her in. She smiled too gently. Morgan, this has gone far enough. I said. Far enough for who? She lowered her eyes. Your mother is humiliated. She humiliated me in a public office. She was scared. Of what? Of losing the house, of losing control, of being judged. There it was. Judged. Not wrong. Not sorry. Judged. I asked Ruth if she had seen the original notice. She looked toward the street. Your brother said there were papers. Did you see them? Morgan, families survive by not keeping score. I said, families also collapse by hiding receipts. She flinched as if I had raised my voice. I had not. She set the casserole on my porch table and said, if you keep going, You may not like what this does to everyone. That was when I understood Ruth's role better than I ever had. She was not neutral. She was the velvet rope around my mother's image. Soft, decorative, and always blocking the exit. That night, after Ruth left the casserole on my porch, I sat at the spreadsheet until the house was completely quiet. The next morning, while I was reading the timeline one more time, the insurance investigator called. Her name was Janice Porter. She had a calm voice that made every question sound routine, which made it more dangerous for my family. She said she had reviewed the initial packet and my request for records. Then she asked, "Mr. Kelly, were the hotel payments intended to support a property response or to provide temporary lodging for a family member?" I said, "Temporary lodging. Do you have documentation?" "Yes." "Do the transfer memos reflect that?" "Yes." "Can you send them in original export form?" That phrase mattered. Original export form. Not screenshots. Not copied text. Not family summaries. Records. I sent the bank export, transfer confirmations, hotel invoices, text requests, and the timeline. Then I sat there with my laptop open and felt something I had not expected. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired in a new way. There is a special exhaustion that comes from proving the obvious to strangers because the people who raised you decided obvious truth was negotiable. Janice emailed back 4 hours later. Received. A few dates in the submitted narrative appear inconsistent with supporting documentation. We may need clarification from the submitting parties. I sat still after that. 4 hours earlier, I had been the problem in my family's story. Now the office was asking whether their story could survive its own dates. That was the first crack. Then I read the last sentence again. Clarification from the submitting parties. For the first time, the question was not whether I could defend myself. The question was whether they could defend the packet. I opened the partial file again and stopped reading it like a son. I read it like an operations manager. The hotel invoice was attached before Daniel's statement. Daniel's statement was attached before the narrative summary. The narrative summary was the page that used my name most confidently. That order mattered. It meant the packet had not been built around a single misunderstanding. It had been built like a bridge. Invoice, statement, narrative. Money first. Brother second. Blame last. First, the invoices made Leah's emergency look relevant to the property issue. Then Daniel's statement made my involvement look normal. Then the narrative used both to suggest I had known about a notice nobody could prove I received. I wrote one sentence at the top of a new page. If they remove my name, the packet collapses. Then I noticed the footer. Revised narrative, version 2. Version 2 meant version 1 existed. Version 1 meant someone had changed the story before it reached the office. I scrolled back up. The PDF had an attachment list. Hotel invoice. Daniel's statement. Claim narrative. Property notice summary. But the actual notice was not attached. The summary was there. The notice was missing. That was not an empty space. That was a door with a fresh lock on it. For a few seconds, I did nothing. I just stared at the missing attachment name and listened to my own kitchen hum. Then my phone buzzed. "Daniel." "Do not overthink the file," he wrote. I had not told him the file had arrived. I had not told him I was reading it. I had not told him I had seen version 2. So I wrote another line under the first one. "Daniel knows I have the packet." 30 seconds later, my mother called. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Please remember that your father would not want this picked apart by strangers." Not, "What did you find?" Not, "Let me explain the missing notice." Just my father's memory laid across the doorway like a sandbag. I did not move the sandbag. I stepped over it. I did not call back. A person who answers too early lets the lie choose the room. I went back to the attachment list. The file did not give me the notice, but it gave me the shape of the cover-up. Someone had summarized a notice instead of attaching it. Someone had revised the narrative. Someone had inserted Daniel's statement between the money and the blame. Someone had hoped nobody would read the order. Then my mother sent the message that confirmed where the story was weakest. Do not make this public. This is a family misunderstanding. Think about how this looks. Not sorry. Not explain. Not send me the notice. Just protect the image. I wrote back. I am thinking about what the records show. She did not respond for an hour. Then Daniel called again. This time, I answered. His voice was low. You are going to ruin Mom. No, Daniel. I am going to stop being used to protect her. Same thing. The line landed so cleanly that I almost thanked him for it. He had just told me the family rule out loud. Protecting my mother and protecting the lie were the same thing. I asked him one more question. Where is the original notice? He breathed into the phone. Morgan, you do not have the whole file. I looked at the missing attachment name on my screen. Then I said, I know. That was the moment he went silent. Not angry. Silent. Because he had just confirmed there was more file to have. At that point, I stopped asking which one was worse. My mother had used my name, and Daniel had helped protect the lie. The file would answer both of them. Then my email pinged. Janice. The subject line was, Preserve Original Exports. The body had only 2 sentences. Please do not discuss the missing notice with the submitting parties before the review call. There may be a discrepancy in who prepared the revised narrative. I read the second sentence twice. Who prepared? Not what changed. Who prepared? For the first time, the office was not just looking at the dates, it was looking for a hand on the file. I almost called my mother right then. I almost called Daniel and asked what else was missing. But that would have warned them where the file was bleeding. So I did the one thing my family hated most. I waited. The follow-up review was set for the next Monday. This time, I knew my family would come prepared for theater. So I prepared for procedure. I printed 3 copies of the timeline. I printed the bank transfer history with memo lines highlighted. I printed the hotel invoices. I printed Daniel's statement. I printed my mother's accidental voice-to-text message about the insurance packet needing to look like I knew. I printed the email from Janice Porter, confirming inconsistencies. Then I placed everything in a plain black folder. No dramatic binder. No colored tabs. No handwritten note across the front. Just clean paper in chronological order. That weekend, I did not attend Sunday dinner. My mother texted, If you skip this family meal, do not expect people to forget it. I did not answer. Daniel texted, You look guilty when you hide. I did not answer. Aunt Ruth texted, Please pray before you do permanent damage. I did not answer. Silence had always been something they used against me. This time, I used it as a locked door. On Sunday evening, Leah called me. That was the only call I answered. Her voice sounded small. She said, Morgan, did I do something wrong? My stomach dropped. I said, No. Why would you think that? She said Aunt Ruth had told her there was tension because of the hotel payments. I closed my eyes. Of course, they had started pulling Leah toward the center. When a family system begins to lose control, it reaches for the person with the least power and the most guilt. I told Leah she had done nothing wrong. I told her I was glad she had a safe place to sleep. Then I asked her one question. Did anyone tell you the hotel invoices were being attached to a property insurance packet? She went quiet. No, she said. Did anyone ask you to write anything about why you were there? No. Aunt Ruth told me not to worry about paperwork. That gave me one more note. Not a weapon against Leah. A protection for her. I wrote, Leah not informed of packet use. That became important because it showed the family had used her crisis without fully telling her how. The innocent person they had claimed to protect was also part of what they hid. That was the red line I could not uncross. I could tolerate being called difficult. I could tolerate being mocked for spreadsheets. I could even tolerate my mother pretending she had not hurt me, because I had practiced that for years. But I could not tolerate them using Leah's emergency as cover, then dragging her into guilt when the records started moving. Monday morning, I arrived at the appraisal review office 10 minutes early. My family arrived together. My mother wore the same navy blazer. Daniel wore a charcoal jacket and carried a leather folder. Aunt Ruth had no casserole this time, only tissues. Marcy came too, which told me Daniel expected a performance he could explain later as emotional support. My mother looked at my folder and gave a small, sad smile. It was the smile she used before telling people I had misunderstood her. "Are we really doing this?" she asked. I said, "Yes." Daniel stepped beside her. "Let's not make this dramatic. A month earlier, that sentence would have worked on me. I would have softened my face. I would have said I did not want drama. I would have helped them define accountability as cruelty. Instead, I said, then let's keep it factual." The clerk called our file. We moved to a small conference room with a laminated table and a speakerphone in the center. A property review staff member sat at one end. Janice Porter joined by phone. Her voice filled the room with professional calm. "Good morning. This is Janice Porter from the Insurance Review Unit. I understand all relevant parties are present." My mother immediately said, "We are only here because my son has created confusion." Janice did not respond to the emotion. She said, "We are here to clarify inconsistencies in the submitted packet." That sentence changed the air. My mother's face tightened. Daniel opened his folder. Aunt Ruth stared at the table. Janice continued, "Mrs. Kelly, the packet submitted on April 6 included hotel invoices and a narrative suggesting those expenses were related to disruption around a property response deadline. Is that correct?" My mother said, "Everything was happening at once. It was a very stressful time." Janice said, "That does not answer my question." Daniel leaned forward. "What Mom means is, Morgan had been coordinating things." Janice said, "Mr. Kelly's transfer memos describe temporary emergency lodging. The invoices appear to relate to lodging for another family member. Why were those invoices attached to a property response claim before Mr. Kelly was told a notice existed?" There it was. One question. No shouting. No insult. No accusation. Just the hinge that opened the door. My mother looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his folder. Aunt Ruth whispered, "Oh, Evelyn." My mother recovered quickly. She said, "Morgan knew there were many issues. He likes to pretend he was excluded, but he knew this family was under pressure." Janice said, "Pressure is not the same as notice." I slid my timeline across the table to the property review staff member. Daniel said, "What is that?" I said, "Dates." He gave a short laugh. "Of course." Janice asked me to summarize. I kept it simple. I said the first hotel booking was created before I was asked for help. I said my transfers were labeled for emergency lodging. I said I was not sent a court notice. I said Daniel's first mention of court issues came after the hotel transfers and after the family began accusing me of meddling. I said the packet used my name and payments to imply awareness I did not have. My mother interrupted. "He is making it sound so ugly." I looked at her. It was ugly before I described it. The room went still. Daniel snapped, "Morgan." Janice said, "Please let him finish." That was new. A stranger had done what my family never did. She let me finish. I turned to Daniel's written statement. I read the line aloud. Morgan had been coordinating payments and documents for Mom, so we believed he was handling the paperwork side. Then I looked at him. "Which documents did you give me?" He said, "You were aware." "Which documents? Don't cross-examine me." "Which documents?" He looked at my mother. She said, "This is exactly what he does." Janice cut in. "Mrs. Kelly, do you have proof the notice was sent to Mr. Kelly before the response deadline?" My mother said, "It was discussed." Janice said, "Do you have proof?" My mother did not answer. Daniel said, "Families do not always communicate with formal proof." Janice said, "Claims do." That was the moment Daniel stopped looking reasonable. A family misunderstanding does not require a fabricated packet. My mother tried to cry then. I do not say that lightly. There were tears, but I had seen my mother cry from pain, and I had seen her cry from strategy. Whew. This was strategy. She pressed a tissue under one eye and said, "I am a widow trying to keep my husband's house from being picked apart. My son used to understand that." Aunt Ruth touched her shoulder. The staff member shifted uncomfortably. Daniel looked relieved, because tears had always reset the room. But Janice Porter had not been raised by Evelyn Kelly. She said, "I understand this is emotional. The documentation still needs to support the claim." My mother lowered the tissue. For the first time, she looked directly at me without the performance. There was anger there. Real anger. Not hurt. Not confusion. Anger that the old tools were failing. She said, "Morgan, please, we do not need strangers in our business." I said, "You put my name in the business." She said, "Because you were helping." I was helping Leah. You were helping the family. No. I was helping a person who needed a safe place to sleep. Daniel muttered, "Same thing." I turned to him. "No, Daniel. That difference is the whole file." The property review staff member asked for copies of the transfer records. I handed them over. Janice asked if I could confirm that the bank export was directly downloaded. I said yes. She asked if the memo lines were entered at the time of transfer. I said yes. She asked if I had any message showing I was told about the court notice before the deadline. I said no, and that I had searched my records. Then I gave them the text where my mother said the insurance packet had to look like I knew because otherwise they would ask why they waited. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a sob. Not a gasp. A small, sharp inhale of someone watching a locked drawer open in public. Daniel said, "That was taken out of context." Janice said, "What is the context?" He opened his mouth. No words came out. The staff member read the text twice. Aunt Ruth whispered, "Evelyn, what does that mean?" My mother snapped, "It means, Morgan saves everything." I said, "Yes." That single word did more than any speech I could have made. Yes, I save things. Yes, I read dates. Yes, I label payments. Yes, I keep copies. Yes, I finally used the habits you mocked to protect myself from the story you wrote. The review ended without a dramatic ruling at the table. Real consequences often begin quietly. Janice said the claim narrative could not be accepted as submitted. She said the documentation did not support the representation that I had been responsible for the missed response deadline. She said the lodging-related expenses appeared unrelated to the claimed property response disruption as presented. She said the file would be marked for correction and review. That sounded dry. It was devastating. My mother's face hardened. Daniel looked down at his hands. Aunt Ruth finally stopped touching anyone's shoulder. The staff member gathered the papers and said updated notices would be issued after the insurance review decision was documented. We stood. Nobody knew what to do with their bodies. My mother had entered expecting me to fold. Daniel had entered expecting to manage the room. Aunt Ruth had entered expecting to soften the edges. They left with the edges sharpened by records. In the hallway, my mother grabbed my arm. Not hard, but with ownership. "Morgan," she said, "you need to fix this." I looked at her hand until she removed it. Then I said, "I already did." Daniel stepped between us. "Do you have any idea what this does to Mom?" I said. "Do you have any idea what she tried to do to me?" He said. "You were never going to lose anything serious." That was another confession. Not that they had done nothing. That they had calculated the damage and decided I could absorb it. I said, "You do not get credit for aiming below disaster." His face flushed. Marcy touched his sleeve, not to defend me, but to stop him from saying more in public. My mother whispered, "After everything I did for you." I said, "You keep saying that like love is a lien." She looked genuinely shocked. Maybe nobody had ever said it that cleanly to her. They brought my name into the room. The file brought the truth with it. The official rejection came 2 days later. It was not a movie moment. No judge slammed a gavel. No crowd applauded. It was an email with a PDF attachment and a subject line that sounded boring enough to be holy. Claim narrative correction required. The insurance office rejected the false version of the claim as submitted. They requested correction of the notice handling, removal of unsupported implications about my role, and a direct explanation for why emergency lodging invoices had been attached to a property response narrative. In plain English, they had to explain the fabricated packet. My mother's first reaction was not remorse. It was image control. By dinner, Paul texted, "I heard things got blown out of proportion." I wrote, "Ask for the dates." He did not answer. Marcy texted, "Daniel is upset. I think everyone is hurt." I wrote, "Everyone is not equally responsible." She did not answer either. Aunt Ruth left a voicemail. "I hope you are satisfied," she said. "Your mother is humiliated." I saved it and let the phone go quiet. My mother finally texted at 9:12 that night. "Are you happy now?" I looked at the screen. Then I set the phone face down. No. I was not happy. I was done. The rejection gave the family something they could not soften with tone: a document number. The property review file had to be corrected. Daniel's statement was questioned. My mother had to explain who received the original notice and why my name had been attached to a deadline I never saw. Leah found out her hotel emergency had been used inside paperwork she never approved. She called my mother herself. She told her not to use her name, her invoices, or her crisis again. That shook my mother more than anything I said. Leah had been their shield. When the shield spoke, the room changed. Daniel tried to slide away from the packet. He said he had relied on Mom. He said he thought I knew. He said nobody meant harm. I told him harm does not disappear because the person causing it uses softer verbs. A week later, my mother invited me to what she called a reset dinner. Not an apology. Not accountability. A reset. I did not go. She called me cold. Daniel called me vindictive. Ruth said I was letting paperwork replace family. I said, paperwork did not replace family. Paperwork revealed what family had become. Then I stopped arguing. 2 weeks after the rejection, I reviewed every point of access my family still had to my life. Bills. Emergency contacts. Spare keys. Shared accounts. Property emails. Recurring payments. Little charges I had covered because it was easier than another fight. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. I had been less a son than a silent infrastructure system. So I began disconnecting. Not dramatically, correctly. I removed my payment information from anything that was not legally mine. I changed my locks. I returned my mother's key by certified mail. Then I sent one written boundary. I will not communicate about financial, legal, insurance, or property matters unless the request is in writing, complete, and truthful. I will not accept blame for documents I did not receive or decisions I did not make. My mother called it hostile. I called it accurate. Daniel texted, "You sound like a lawyer now." I replied, "No, I sound like a man who learned." That was the last text I sent him for 3 months. Leah and I stayed in touch. She moved into a better apartment and sent me a photo of a small kitchen window with a basil plant on the sill. It made me happier than any family dinner had in years. My mother eventually left a voicemail. She said, "I am sorry this became so ugly. This became ugly. Not, I hid the notice. Not, I used your name." Just a soft sentence with no person holding the knife. Daniel's apology was shorter. "I regret how some things played out." Some things played out. That was not accountability. That was fog. I did not respond. What I chose was distance. Clean, sad, necessary distance. The final time I saw my mother that year was at a memorial service for an old neighbor. She found me near the coffee urn and said, "People keep asking why you don't come around." There it was again. How it looks. Always the mirror, never the wound. I said, "Tell them the truth." Her mouth tightened. "What truth is that?" That I stopped coming where I was only welcome as long as I was useful. She looked toward Daniel, then back at me. "You always have to make it sound so cruel." I said, "No. I just stopped making it sound polite." She walked away. Daniel did not follow me. Ruth did not mediate. And for once, nobody asked me to fix the room. That night, I went home to my quiet house. The locks were new. My desk was clean. The black folders sat in the bottom drawer, not on top anymore. I made coffee because I wanted something warm in my hands that nobody had asked me to provide. Then I opened the old family group chat. Years of requests sat there in my pocket. I archived it. Not to erase them, to stop carrying the room with me. This story is fictional and created for entertainment and educational purposes, but the lesson is real. Self-worth needs personal boundaries, and manipulation gets harder when you protect yourself with records instead of arguments. For years, my silence meant I was cornered. After the insurance file, silence became my answer. It became my lock. It became morning coffee, without a demand attached. It became a clean desk, a closed drawer, and a phone that no longer trained me to panic. I did not lose my family that day. I lost the job of protecting their lies. So I will leave the question where the file left me. Should forgiveness come before accountability, or was the boundary the real ending?